Can you maybe elaborate on what is the role of cohesion and the collective, not to use that term, but multiple humans together, connected in the human condition?
Sure. I keep getting the feeling that Yaron and I are actually having a disagreement about empirical reality, because I think that Enlightenment rationalist political thought features the individual, it features the state. There isn't really a nation other than the nation. The people is, as a collective, is created by the state. And when the state disappears, then the collective disappears. Now, I think that when conservatives of all stripes look at this kind of thinking, that there's the individuals and then there's the state, and there really isn't anything else. When they look at that, they say, even before you get to consequences, it's a terrible theory, because when we try to understand any field of inquiry, any domain, any subject area, when you try to understand it, we try to come up with a small number of concepts and of relations among the concepts, which is supposed to be able to explain, to illuminate as much as possible the important things that are taking place in the domain. And conservatives look at this, individuals and the state, and they say, you're missing most of what's going on in politics, also in personal human relations as well. But it just doesn't look like a description of human beings. It looks like a completely artificial thing. And then conservatives say, well, look, once you adopt this artificial thing, then the consequences are horrific because you're not describing reality. So a conservative reality begins with an empirical view of what are human beings like. And the first thing you notice about human beings, or at least the first thing I think conservatives notice, is that they're sticky, is that they clump, they turn into groups. And you take any arbitrary collection of human beings and set them to a task, or even just leave them alone, and they quickly form into groups, and those groups are always structured as hierarchies. So there's competition within the hierarchy, who's going to be the leader, who's going to be number two. But there are, everywhere you look in human societies, universally, there are groups, the groups compete, and they're structured internally as hierarchies, and then there are internal competitions for who leads the different groups. And when we think about scientific explanation, we allow that there are different levels of explanation. That a macroscopic object like a table, it doesn't have properties that can be directly derived from the properties of the atoms or the molecules or the microfibers that make up the table. And that's understood, that there's what academic philosophers call emergent properties, that when you get up to the level of the table, it has properties like that you can't put your fist through it, which you can't necessarily know just by looking at the atoms alone. And I think conservatives say the same thing is true for political theory, for social theory, that looking at an individual human being and thinking about what does that individual human being need, which Yaron does very eloquently in his writings. But that doesn't tell you what the characteristics are of this hierarchically structured group. As soon as you have that, it has its own qualities. So an example, the question of what holds these groups together. And we need to answer that question. I try to answer it by saying there's such a thing as mutual loyalty. Mutual loyalty is shorthand for human beings. Individuals have the capacity to include another individual within their self, within their conception of their self. When two people do it, it creates a bond, like a bond between two atoms creates a molecule. That doesn't mean that they lose their individuality. Within the group, they may still continue competing with one another, but that doesn't mean that there isn't, in reality, a bond. And that real bond is the stuff of which political events and political history are made, is the coming together, the cohesion, and the dissolution of these bonded loyalty groups. That's the reality of politics. And so when I hear these discussions about individuals in the state, I feel like we're missing most of the reality. And in order to understand the political reality, we need to understand what makes human beings coherent to groups, what makes them dissolve the groups come apart and end up creating civil wars and that kind of thing. I think we also need to know what in practice. Rival groups do come together and bond. I mean, basically, when we think about democratic society, we're talking about different groups. We can call them tribes, or you can come up with a different name. But different tribal groupings with different views, they come together to form a nation, and they're able to do that, even though often they hate each other. Like we were talking about the American Revolution, and often they hate each other. And nevertheless, they're able to come together. Why? How? And that leads us into questions like, how does honor, the giving of honor by one group to another, how does that increase the mutual loyalty between groups that are still competing with one another? All of these questions, I think we have to answer them in order to be able to talk about politics. And I think the first reason why one should approach politics as a conservative rather than as an individualist is because it gives us these theoretical tools to be able to talk about reality, which we don't have as long as we keep within the individualist framework.
As you're talking, the metaphor that's popping up in my mind, and this is also something that bothers me with theoretical physics. The metaphor is, there's some sense in which there's things called theories of everything, where you try to describe the basic laws of physics, how they interact together. And once you do, you have a sense that you understand all of reality. In a sense, you do. And that to me, that to me is understanding the individual, like how the individual behaves in this world. But then you're saying that hey, you're also forgetting chemistry, biology, how all of that actually comes together, the stickiness, stickiness of molecules, and how they build different systems. And some systems can kill each other, some systems can flourish, some can make pancakes and bananas, and some can make poison and all those kinds of things. And we need to consider the full stack of things that are constructed from the fundamental basics. And I guess, Yaron, you're saying that no, you're just like the theoretical physicist. It all starts at the bottom. Like, if you need to preserve the fundamentals of reality, which is the individual, like the basic atom of human society is the individual to you.
So yes, so the basic unit, the basic moral unit, the basic ethical unit in society is the individual. And yeah, of course we form groups. And you can't understand history unless you understand group formation and group motivation. And I have a view about what kind of groups should be formed. And politically, from a political perspective, voluntary ones in which we join when we want to join and we can leave when we want to leave, and ones that help us, and clearly groups help us, pursue whatever it is our goal is ultimately. So in the pursuit of happiness, there are lots of groups that one wants to form, whether it's marriage, whether it's businesses, whether it's sports teams, whether it's there are lots of different groups one wants to form. But the question is, what is the standard of well-being? Is it the standard of well-being some algorithm that maximizes the well-being of a group, some utilitarian function? Is it something that's inherent in the group that we can measure as goodness, and to hell with the individuals within, as long as we can get that the group to function well? We don't really care about whether the individuals are. So to me, the goal of creating groups is the well-being of the individual, and that's why it needs to be voluntary, and that's why there has to be a way out of those. Sometimes it's costly; it's not a cheap out. That's why you should really think about what groups you and this. On an issue that's very controversial, maybe we can discuss, maybe not. This is why, to me, immigration is so important, right? Open immigration or free immigration is because that's another group that I would like people to be able to voluntarily choose, both in and out. And I'd like to see people be able to go and join that group that, that they believe will allow for the pursuit of happiness. But let me say that, that's a description of an ideal, what I'm just saying, right? I recognize that that's not the reality in which we live. I recognize that that's not the reality in which history, recognizing that that the individual exists in a sense philosophically is a massive achievement, right? Human beings, however they evolved, clearly we started out in a tribal context in which the individual didn't matter. We followed the leader. The competition was for power over the group, and dictates how the group should work. The history of human beings is a history of gaining knowledge, and part of the knowledge is the value of an individual. And you can see that in religion, you can see that in philosophy, you can see that through the evolution. And then, we evolved from tribes into nations, and then empires, and conflicts between nations, and conflict between empires. And we tried a lot of different things, if you will. I don't think we always did it on purpose, but we kind of did different philosophies, different sets of ideas drove us towards different collectives, different groupings, and different ways in which to structure. And after, 3,000 years of kind of known history, there's history before that, but we don't know much about it, 3,000 years of known history, you can sit back and evaluate. And I think that's what is done in the Enlightenment. And you sit back, and certainly we can do it today. We can sit back and evaluate what promotes human flourishing and what doesn't. And what do we mean by human flourishing? Who's flourishing? Well, individual human beings. Now, since I don't believe in a zero-sum world, and the world is not zero-sum, we can see that. It's empirically possible to show that the world is not a zero-sum game. My human flourishing doesn't come at your expense. So I can show that a system that promotes my flourishing will probably promote your flourishing as well, and promotes the general welfare in that sense, because it promotes individuals' flourishing. And we can look at all these examples of how we evolved, and what leads to bloodshed and what doesn't, and what promotes this ability to flourish as an individual. Again, an achievement, the idea of individual flourishing. And then we can think about how to create a political system around that, a political system that recognizes and allows for the formation of groups.